Good evening and welcome to the December 11th Council work session. So I just want to talk through the agenda a little bit so Council knows what's happening, and if there are big concerns about it, you can express those concerns. We have committee reports and items. We have a conversation today about the auditor, and I want to make sure that we have enough time for that conversation. So I'm going to ask you, if you don't have a super time-sensitive item to share, to consider sending a memo, sending an email, or holding it, and possibly if we have time at the end, we can come back to it. If it's time-sensitive, we'll devote time, but I want to keep that short. I'm also proposing to have the discussion about the winter strategies at the end, after the auditor conversation. And again, I'm going to restrict that to it's basically a report, hoping not to have too much back and forth so that we're able to really maximize the time that we have available for this conversation. And then to talk about, I want to just sort of lay the groundwork for how I want to have this conversation about the auditor. So we've already had a work session. The city attorney has done research the questions that you asked in the first work session. I'm going to give him just sort of 5 minutes to report back. He's already provided some of that information to you. My plan is to do this as a round robin. So I'm just going to go around the table. Chris, probably just going to start with you. I'll do one round question, just talking about auditors in general. If you see that as a useful function, your thoughts about the value and priorities of an auditor function. I will take notes, summarize that. We'll do a second round robin to talk about the specific initiative, your thoughts about the strengths of that initiative, any concerns you may have, with a goal that we will get, if not today, we'll get very close today, hopefully, to being at a point where you as a council can decide whether you're going to act or not, simply enable us to come back in January. So 3 minutes. The other warning that I'm giving you is that I will count, if you ask for the council to respond to comments in your 3 minutes, I'll count that in your 3 minutes. We'll count that in the 3 minutes because we don't have a lot of time and 2 round robins. So I'm seeing this as a kind of just take your temperature. Where are we on this issue? Do we need more work on it? But not a big, answer everybody's questions and respond to everyone's concerns. So with that said, I am going to turn it over to, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I was so ready to roll. Okay, committee reports. Betty, I know you have one.
Of items.
Items, go for it.
Okay, and I think this is urgent. And I timed it at home, 3 minutes. Okay. And I need a second round too, but Garrison Keillor is one of the most admirable and admired citizens living today. FDR and MLK and Eleanor Roosevelt are all dead, and Wayne Morse. He's a famous philosopher, poet, storyteller. And for more than 40 years, probably 50, he's been a source of entertainment, mental stimulation, and inspiration for many thousands of Americans. He, some years ago, honored Eugene and the artist who created the work at the airport by agreeing to be one of the flying people. An installation which has welcomed Eugene's homecoming citizens and provided a happy introduction to visitors. Flying people make people smile when they see them, and the smile gets even broader when they recognize Garrison Keillor as one of them and wonder why he's there. Now, it's been decided that because he is accused of touching a woman's back and has been fired by Minnesota Public Radio, that he will not be included when the artwork is reinstalled. We can't control Minnesota Public Radio, but we can control our own city. And I think that the manager has the power to stop this ridiculous condemnation. City manager can decide, and I hope he will. If we demanded undisputed purity, whatever the airport people think purity is, from all the flying people. How are we going to hire detectives to investigate the past of all the people, to check out the current state of their virtue? Those of you who are familiar with the Bible may remember the story about Jesus and whoever cast the first stone, whoever's without sin. Well, that's my first item, and I hope the city manager, who does have the power, will see that Garrison is included with the flying people when they're reinstalled. I do think they should be back where they were, and that's another matter. And one thing I wanted to say just briefly, leaf blowers, we are saying we're getting rid of pollution, cutting down on it, and yet the city is using leaf blowers in the parks and spewing out pollution where we could be have someone doing it by hand and maybe employ some people. And my third item was, I'm very concerned when I hear that there are going to be buildings by the river, and I hope we can stop that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other items of timely importance? Okay, thank you. So now we will proceed with the main agenda item, and I will turn it over to City Attorney.
I'm out of your time. Goodness. This will take less than 5 minutes. I did send to you on Friday an email that included answers to the questions. That included information about elected official salaries, financial audits performed by the city, and then a list of what the reduction strategies and potential reduction strategies have been in the past, I think it was 6 years, to give you the information about what different sizes of numbers would mean in terms of potential either additions or cuts. So you have that information. The additional piece of information was answers to 2 legal questions that you had asked at your last meeting. The first one that Claire had asked about, would employees of the auditor and the proposed charter amendment be subject to council adopted regulations related to city employees, such as the sanctuary city ordinance, and what we concluded is that no, they would not, that they would be independent of the city manager as well as the city council. The second question was whether the performance auditor would have authority to audit the operations and programs of eWeb, and what we concluded, and we explained it in the memo, that no, they would not. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what I or Catherine Brotherton opine on this. Ultimately, it's going to be a court decision, but for the reasons that we explain in the memo that I sent you, we believe that that's what a court would conclude, is that eWeb operations would not be covered by this proposed charter amendment. In terms of where you go from here, the only thing, Mayor, that I would add is once you have gone through those rounds, you have the same options that I had mentioned at your last meeting. You can vote to support the proposed charter amendment. You could vote to oppose it. You could decide to do nothing, or you could refer an alternative measure. And so at some point, you would want to choose one of those 4 options.
And would you just remind people on the timeline if they wanted to do an alternative?
So you would need to act. You would need to give us final direction as to what that alternative would be by the end of January, so that you could actually take action on a resolution that we'd prepare for you. The latest would be February 12th. And so if you're going to do that, we would need time to hear what the direction was, draft up something, bring it back to you, give you an opportunity to say, yep, that hits the mark, no, that misses the mark. And we'd want to have that final direction after you have reviewed a draft by the end of January.
Okay, so I am just going to begin a round robin. If that's okay with you, I'm going to start with you, Chris, and everybody just gets their 3 minutes. And the question that I'm suggesting you respond to is do you think the city of Eugene would benefit from an auditor, not this specific proposal that's on the ballot, but an auditor in general? And then what are the components that you think are important about that?
Great Yeah, I've actually said for a long time now, I think that an audit function is a tremendous thing to have. I don't know if embarrassed is maybe too strong a word, that we haven't created that function before now. There's been a lot going on. And so in a way, I'm thankful that the proponents brought the conversation up and have brought it to the fore. So yeah, I think now would be a good time to see about having an audit function. I think that's important. Now, we already do audits. We do a number of audits, but I think the specific elements of performance auditing or auditing elements other than just financial, I think is a valuable addition. So I think that's the first response I would have is, yes, I think the time is right and we should definitely talk about having an audit function. I think absolutely. The next point is, if there's going to be an audit function, it needs to be an audit function that is effective, efficient, works well, and accomplishes the purpose that it sets out to do. And so I think whatever it is we put in place, elected, appointed, supervised, whatever, it needs to accomplish the goals. And I mentioned at the last meeting, I see improving services and saving money as part of it, but also exposing mismanagement and catching fraud is also a part of that job, but it's always something in balance. And so I would want to craft a proposal, I would want to have a proposal that really balances those and tries to get at all of them. And so I think that would be an important aspect for me. If the motion currently that's being proposed for the ballot passes, at the end of the day, it's really not going to affect me. So I do not have a personal stake in whether or not this passes or not, because this audit function is not going to affect me. I'm going to continue to do my job, and I'm going to continue to represent the people. So my interest is in what is best for the city of Eugene in terms of its efficiency, its effectiveness, innovation, saving money, improving service, catching mismanagement if it's there, and exposing fraud if it should occur. I'm not afraid to do that. I think that this proposal is one way to get at it, but I'm not sure it's the best way to get at it, that it incorporates all of the best elements that I would want to see if I were developing such a proposal. I would want to be inclusive and have a lot of minds coming together to help me from the community to design what that process is. I would want to have a committee working on it that was well-known, that included people who have the regard and respect of the community involved in that process. And so for me, that's my interest here. I think we need to have auditing. I think auditing is important, but I want to craft an auditing idea or proposal that represents the community and has the best interests of the city at heart.
Okay. Betty.
Thank you. 15 years ago, the Citizens Charter Review Committee recommended that we have a performance auditor. If we as a council were going to discuss it, any time between then and now would have been a good time. This is not a good time. The Citizens Group has crafted a proposal. They did a great deal of work to get it on the ballot. It will be on the ballot. If it fails, well, one time we should have discussed this a long time ago, and we should have put something on the ballot. But then, if they hadn't gotten enough signatures, I would have been in favor of our discussing it and considering putting something on the ballot. They did get enough signatures. Now we should wait to see the results of the election. If it fails, then we should discuss how to put something else on the ballot. But for now, I think we should thank them for their work and respect the fact that they've done it. And if we wish as a council or as individuals to support it, we can, but we definitely should not put something else on the ballot. That would be ridiculous and would harm the whole idea, be detrimental to the whole idea. Thank you.
All right, Emily?
I think we need a city auditor. I campaigned on being accountable and transparent, and I think having an auditor would help that. I've heard that from a lot of people. It's strange to me that it's been 15 years since it was recommended and nothing has been done until the Citizens Group started working on it. So they did a ton of work. Volunteers got 11,500 signatures. That's quite a bit of public input. There'll be campaigning. If it fails, then we can work on one. If it passes and there's problems, we can do housekeeping, just like we did in the last election. 5 of us can put it on the ballot, it's voted on. So I'm worried about being, oh, this is in concrete, we can't ever change it. I think we should try it. I hope it wins and see how it goes. I think it does include eWeb from my reading, that it audits all city operations and activities, included but not limited to departments, offices, boards, activities, agencies, contracts, franchises, projects, and programs. So I'm sure the court will be happy to decide that, but I wouldn't use that as a reason to not have it. Betty said everything that I had on my list, so we could just sit here for a minute and a half and think about all that stuff. But I will pause for now.
All right. Alan.
Yeah, I think an auditor can serve the city very well and be a very valuable function within the city. Accountability is very important, and open and fair and transparent and accountable government is one of the things I ran on as a city councilor. And there are many auditors around the country of various forms and types, so it's not like it's a new idea. It can reduce cost, it can find efficiencies, it can streamline processes and make things work better. I'm not real convinced that it's going to find much fraud, because we just don't have a lot of fraud. In the whole 10 years I've been on council, I think I could point to 1 or 2 cases. And those were found and dealt with. I've actually suggested an auditor function in the past, and I held off pushing it forward, mostly because during the recession we made so many changes to city government. We made an incredible amount of changes and reductions in the past few years. And the list is really quite lengthy. It's $30 million worth of changes. And we did do a lot of streamlining, and we did a lot of changes and an enormous amount of change. And frankly, I'm not just very confident we're going to find a whole lot, at least in the general fund. There's a whole other function of the auditor about process in other places that could be valuable. In my 10 years on the budget committee and 10 years as a city councilor, that means I've done 20 city budgets, and all but a few of those have been cut budgets. So and so we've seen a lot of reductions in government and in spending, and the way that we've done things. And I think we're better off for it, and I think I think John runs a pretty tight ship. All in all, I think an auditor function is a good idea, but the devil's are in the details, and how we do it is important. And it is a charter amendment. It's not just a motion. So it is as close as we can get to concrete. So it's not something that we could just willy-nilly change. It would take an enormous amount of effort to go through and change something that is a charter amendment once it's put in place.
Okay. Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I'll answer your question by breaking this down into a couple of other questions. There's really only the important question of how do we feel about the fact that there's already an initiative on the ballot. That's going to happen. And frankly, like Chris, it doesn't affect me that much. I'm happy to have as many people looking over my shoulder as would like to at any time. That's fine. I welcome it. Like Alan, I believe that the transparency and openness that I try to bring to this chair is an important part of what I do and always has been. And so the people will decide that, and I'll live with it either way. If the people want it, excellent. I'll cooperate and make sure I do everything I can to see it happen. And if they don't, then fine. So the only other real question is, will we put a competing measure on the ballot? And I have to say, I don't see the value of this the same way a couple of my colleagues do. At least maybe it's more accurate to say I'm not convinced that there is a value to the citizens of Eugene to spend this amount of money on this service at this time. And for me, the easiest way to see that is to play it all the way to the end. So the proponents of this current ballot initiative have made the point that there's a firewall in terms of what the auditor is empowered to do. They're not empowered to make policy arguments, recommendations, or to do anything that would alter city policy. They're not empowered to make changes. They're not empowered to make changes in city process. They're entirely empowered to gather information and bring it to the public's mind and attention. So the question then is, who's empowered? And the answer is us. We're the only ones empowered. And there's only two things that come out of what the auditor would suggest or find. And that would be a process issue, a procedural city administrative function change, or a policy change. And from the one standpoint, I don't want us to start voting on the details of procedural policy changes that need to be made by the city, because that's the manager's job. Ours is policy. His is the procedure of running the city. Ours is to guide, his is to implement. And I don't want to take that function from him because it's not properly ours in this role of government. Secondly, policy arguments. To imagine that more data and information will alter our policy decisions is to imagine that this council makes decisions constantly on the basis only of logic, reason, and data, which I don't mean anything badly, but I would suggest sometimes we don't. And so I could see I've run out of time. I'd like to have a second round, but.
Well, you will,
All right.
and you can fold in the next thoughts. Okay, Jennifer.
Thank you. So I agree with a lot of the things that Chris said. I think that a performance auditor in general is a good idea, and I think Betty's right. We do owe the people that have worked really hard on this measure a thank you for really bringing it up and making us, I think in some ways, really discuss it. But I do think there are some issues with the current measure, and I think our voters are smart enough that if there were two measures, they could decide for themselves which one was appropriate for their votes. So I don't think it would cause that big of a problem if we did decide to go ahead and do a competing measure.
Okay, great. Claire?
Thank you. Well, I wanted to start by saying I found the research provided by the mayor's committee that looked into the various forms of auditors out there to be very helpful in showing how different jurisdictions have established their auditors and provided a good basis for this council to discuss pros and cons of various options, including the proposal that's going before voters. Right now, I'm not ready to say that this council should take a position on the ballot measure, but I do think it's completely valid for us to have a discussion about it. And I agree that if the current ballot measure were to fail, that this council should be prepared to continue to seek ways to establish a performance auditor function for the city. My main challenges with the current measure, now that I have more information about it, is one, the significant budget commitment that it calls for without providing clear evidence that that level of resources are necessary to achieve the desired outcome of identifying improved efficiencies and financial savings. And then the second piece is that it appears to be an elected office and staff paid for by city tax dollars through the general fund that will not be subject to city policies and ordinances that govern other city staff, such as our expanded sanctuary cities ordinance. I don't think this was necessarily the intent of the crafters, but in seeking to create that firewall between this office and the council and city manager, that is what the result is, and that troubles me. It troubles me that a whole office is going to be funded through our general fund, but not accountable to the policies and city ordinances that this body adopts on behalf of city staff. So I think there are better ways to achieve that firewall that doesn't create what is essentially a brand new government agency and office within the city that isn't accountable to those local ordinances.
Okay. All right, so I am going to summarize this, what I'm hearing from you, and then we're going to do another round. And we're doing this pretty efficiently, so there might actually be time for a third round. So it sounds to me pretty universal that all of you believe that an auditor function would be a valuable function in the city of Eugene.
I didn't say that.
You said could be valuable, okay, could be valuable, but probably not worth this amount of money. Could be valuable.
Kinda, yeah.
Kinda, okay, if I'm misrepresenting, I won't. So I'll say 6 out of the 7 of you said useful, and 1 has more ambivalence
Maybe.
around it. And more ambivalence around that. What I'm hearing is, concern about kind of respecting the really good work that has been done by the petitioners, that there's a lot of value in that, value in the conversation, desire to make sure that we have the most efficient and effective government, that we get the outcomes that we're after, that probably the value of the auditor is going to be more on the performance side than on the fraud side, because we have not experienced a lot of that in our city and also have gone through repeated budget constrictions. So it's really more a question of the performance than probably the financial savings. So that's fair summary, everyone. I leave anything crucial out in that summary? Okay, so taking that, now I am interested in you playing out specifically on the initiative process yourself and reflecting on your thoughts about if there are, and you've weighed in on a little bit, so this will be a second round for some of you, about the strengths of this proposal, about the things that concern you, or that you think you would want to fix, or that you would be looking for carefully over time on this, either if it's voted for, the things that might need to be fixed after the fact, or if we all offered an alternative, what that might include. Clear enough? Okay, I'm going to let Chris kick it off again.
Yeah, and that's an interesting question. I'll kind of come at it from an angle. And I think the angle is, if we were to think about putting something competing on the ballot, do we have the time to prepare something that's really thoughtful and deliberate? And my first instinct was, yeah, let's put something together. Let's take our stab at what we think is a good process, and let's put it on the ballot and give people a choice. And while I think that has a lot of merit, my concern is, can we prepare something that is really thoughtful, deliberate, and inclusive, and get it done by Valentine's Day or a couple of days before that? And my concern is that if you do it fast, you don't get as good an outcome as if you take your time to do it right and do it inclusively. The proposal that we're being asked to consider was prepared by a secret group. I don't know who was on it or who was not on it. And it was done in a closed process. I never saw minutes. I never saw content. I don't know what their process was. So this is just the product that came out of this thing. And so I have to evaluate that. And I think when they collected 11,000 some odd signatures, I think that's a very clear mandate that people want an auditing kind of function, and I hear that loud and clear. But I don't know how many of those 11,000 some odd people read all 5 pages of this proposal and know exactly what it was they were endorsing. So I tend to think the notion that that was 11,000 signatures endorsing this specific proposal is baloney. I think that's a rounding endorsement of an audit function, and I think we need to give that serious consideration, but I doubt if people read all 5 pages and are endorsing this specific proposal. So with that said, to answer your question, I think we should take a sincere effort at beginning a process to look at what a good audit function might look like and what it could include, whether it's elected or whether it's appointed. I'm beginning to see some merits in an elected office, but I would want to ensure there were appropriate collaborative and inclusive elements in it. And I'm not sure we could get it done by February, but I think we could be making a good effort. So I'm now coming around to the notion that I'm not sure we could get something on the ballot, but I'm not inclined to support this proposal, because in reading it, and I have read all 5 pages, I find some significant concerns in here that, because it's already on the ballot, can't be fixed by the proposers. But I think with a process that we go through, we could fix a lot of it and make an even better one. But I don't know if we could get it done by February.
Okay. Betty.
I don't think we need to fix it. It will be on the ballot, and people will decide whether they support it or not. As for a secret group, I think they're sitting right there, and I didn't ever find anything secretive about them. I do think it's unfortunate that if we heard the mayor's committee, we didn't hear this group talk to us if we are considering whether we would want to support it or not. If we're just going to let the people decide, then that's what we should do. I thought the Register Guard editorial about this was excellent. It said, if there's something wrong with it, if people vote it down, they vote it down. But if they vote for it, it goes into effect, and the council finds there are things wrong, we can propose another charter amendment to change it. We just did that with the election of George Polling's successor, and it wasn't hard at all. If it's obvious that something's wrong, and the public will realize it, and we will realize it. But for now, I think we should let it happen. I think Chris is right that we could, even if we wanted to, we couldn't. These people spent a long time, many months, a lot longer than the mayor's committee spent studying this. And we haven't even started. So I don't think that we could, even if they hadn't done it, we couldn't do it this May. We're starting now. We could have a few years ago, yeah. But for now, I think it's really important that we let them do their campaign. I would like to let them speak to council, but I don't know if that's possible, if the majority will favor that or not. If you want to know anything about their secret lives, we could ask them. I think they're leading citizens, and they've been very out in the open, and I've seen them everywhere during the signature gathering. But I do think it's not true that we can't change it. That could be changed if there are flaws. And I thought the RG did a really good job of saying, people have worked to put it on the ballot, let's let it happen. I would be inclined to support it, but I don't think that's going to happen. But we definitely should not try to put another measure on the ballot. Thank you.
All right. Emily.
Thank you. I think we shouldn't take a position on this. I think that there's been a good petition put out there. There'll be a lot of campaigning, a lot of chances to talk about whether people like this one or what they don't like about it. If there's a lot of things people don't like about it, then it will fail and we can make another attempt. I think that campaigning and voting does give us some public input. If we decide to write a competing measure, in the amount of time we have, we might be able to put forth a few ideas, but basically we're asking staff to write it. And where's the public input on that? As far as, we don't have much fraud, I don't really think we do either, but if you haven't seen it, that doesn't mean it's not there, and that's why you'd want an auditor. This group has spent a couple of years researching this, and it's on their website. So we've had a bunch of research going on. They're different. I just think that we haven't had a petition brought forth by the people since the 90s. So it's really a big, significant statement that they got 11,500 signatures out of 160,000 residents, not all of whom can sign a petition. So I really urge us to take no position and get on with all the other topics we have. We have so many items on our agenda list that don't even have a chance yet. This would take us a lot of time. I don't think we have it right now, and I don't think we need to do it. So how about we just step back and see what happens? Thank you.
Okay. Alan.
Yeah, well, I believe an auditor function can be valuable, has worked in other places. I also think the details are important, and how it is done, how it's set up are very important. I have 5 concerns with the proposal that was put forward. 1 is cost, 2 is the residency requirement, 3 is the accountability, 4 is it changes fundamentally how we elect our officials in a backdoor way, and 5, the lack of public input into the details of this. So one by one, this really has a high cost and lacks in cost effectiveness. This will not pay for itself, despite what people have said. This will cost us $3 to $3.5 million over the next 5 years, almost $700,000 a year. And we have a zero-sum budget, meaning if we pay for this auditor, that means we don't pay for something else. So it's not been vetted against those other alternatives. It's been considered in an abstract all by itself. And how do we pay for it? No discussion about the funding of the auditor versus the other needs and services. You know, our annual budget equivalencies would be a fire engine and a crew, 5 to 6 police officers, 2 more Cahoots vans, most of our homelessness and HSC funding, the Sheldon and branch libraries being closed, downtown library for a day, ambulance funding, jail bed, all of those are equivalent to what this would be. So having that conversation, I think, is a very important one to do. Also, the $153,000 that the auditor would make it one of the highest paid public officials in the entire state of Oregon. Not the highest, but one of. The residency requirement for the auditor doesn't have to live here or live in Eugene or Lane County or even Oregon for that matter. A person could live anywhere. I think the auditor should live in Eugene. Especially at the salary we'd be paying that person. And I wonder why this simple and sensible requirement wasn't put into the charter amendment, and that one baffles me. Third, I don't think there's a real mechanism for accountability of the auditor. As Claire has said, there's no citizen oversight and to help or guide the auditor. They're completely independent of the city's policies. They don't have to comply with our sanctuary city rules necessarily, or our procurement conduct codes, maybe even discrimination laws. They create their own set of rules outside the city government. And then fourth is, I don't need another round, but in a completely backdoor way, this changes the way we elect officials. Our usual system is we do a primary. If 5 people run, then the 2 top vote getters win, and the majority, one person gets the majority wins. In this case, you would have 5 people run, and they could all get well below a majority, say 22, 21, 19, 18%, that's 100, and the 22% person is the auditor without a majority vote, 28% below a majority vote. So that bothers me as well, and I'll need another round.
All right, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I keep coming back to the same question that I've asked an awful lot of people, and some have worked hard to try and give me a good answer, but I haven't heard a convincing one yet. And that question is, then what? Okay. I think I'm hearing a lot of my colleagues say that they think the auditor function would be a really good idea in one form or another, and I'm not against the idea necessarily. I think hey, great, if they can find some good information that helps everybody save money, more transparent, hey, great, beautiful, let's do it. But then what? So the auditor's going to find stuff. They're going to have a product at the end of the day, which is going to be information about how either the city's procedures could change to save money, or how the city's policies could change to save money. So when I go down each of those roads, I say, okay, so the city auditor comes up with an idea about how to change procedures for the city, administrative procedures, and we could save some money. But let's say the manager disagrees, because the manager has a whole host of other reasons why the procedure he has put in place makes sense for running the city from his perspective. The only thing that can happen at that point is for this council to override the manager and say, no, we think you should run the city this way because the auditor found this information. And now we have a battle about who runs the administrative parts of this city, whether it's the council or the manager. And in our current form of government, it's the manager. The council guides with policy. The manager creates and enforces procedure. So let's say that it's policy that the auditor finds fault with. Okay. Will that alter this council's decision-making process? And for example, I would say, okay, what if the vast majority of the city were in favor of something that this council was against, almost unanimously? Would almost the face of complete public support for something alter what this council is doing? And there's only two words I would respond to that: Uber and Lyft. We're not doing that right now because this council sees it differently than the majority of the community. So I would suggest to you that no matter what the auditor comes up with, we either have some conflicts with how we put that product into play if it comes into conflict with how the manager runs the city, or I think it's going to create a series of false expectations that this council will make different decisions based on the data that I just don't believe for a minute. So for me, the most important part of the discussion about having an auditor is, then what?
Okay, Jennifer.
Yeah, so I think Alan covered all the things that I have an issue with. The citizen oversight, having no citizen oversight, that's the biggest one for me. I think that's worked really well with our police auditor, and I think that's something that should have been included. But I also have problems with the residency requirement and the cost, and what Claire was talking about with our policies not affecting those employees in that office. I am concerned about, Chris is concerned about getting a good product done in time. I would hate to put something out that was not quite ready. It wasn't, exactly what we want. So I guess that's something we'd have to decide is, do we have the time to be able to do it?
Claire.
Thank you. So yeah, I think in terms of things that could be improved if we were crafting a new ordinance. I do think the Citizen Oversight Advisory Committee is an important thing. I think pretty much every major decision that we face in this at this body has had some kind of organized citizen input go along with it, and I think the model has worked very well with the police auditor. I also at this point would be inclined to be more supportive of an appointed auditor with a firewall to ensure independence. We looked at some examples where I believe an appointed auditor couldn't be removed without a supermajority of the elected body. I worry about the dynamics of an election for what is supposed to be essentially a neutral position. Partisan politics seems to find its way into everything that we discuss these days, even when we're dealing with nonpartisan offices and issues. So that is a concern. And since it was brought up, as far as the group of citizens who drafted this measure, a number of whom are here in the audience, it's great, Betty, that you know and trust these folks personally, but the majority of voters in the city do not know them. And I don't think we should pretend that the group that put this measure on the ballot doesn't have strong opinions about the structure of our government. They include 2 former city councilors who have shared highly critical opinions about how our city manager form of government operates. And their distrust of the current system is what drove their work and informs the way in which they crafted this measure. So it's the underlying theme of the ballot measure. It was not crafted by unaffiliated volunteer citizens who wanted to build on the prior recommendations of the Charter Review Committee. And I think we should be honest about that at least.
Okay. Thank you all. So I'm going to summarize that and offer a couple points of my own, and we actually have time for another round if we need it, and then we can determine what our next step is. So where to begin? Where to begin with this list? So I'm hearing a pretty significant concern about council action and not really having enough time to offer another action, and a pretty consistent council commitment that if we provide an alternative at any point, that it's thoughtful, deliberative, inclusive of the public, that we've taken careful consideration to do that and not to rush that. So I think that's probably the biggest takeaway. And then the elements of concern, the citizen oversight, the cost, Mike's comment about what then, so being clear that we know what our expected or hoped for outcomes are with an auditor role, and the residency requirement. Am I missing something else? And potentially the fact that this could be, someone who is elected with a minority. I want to just make two comments, and hoping I don't forget what my second comment was before I go on. The first one is in response to the request by the city accountability that they should make a presentation to council. And one of the reasons that we did the study group as we did is because it is a partisan issue. If we invite them to appear, we must also give equal time to opponents to appear. So the reason I created that sort of neutral setting was so that we could hear about their proposal as well as hearing about other proposals and do that in a neutral way, which was giving equal time. So as we proceed, that's a possibility that the council can have if they want to have advocates and opponents, but that was not the landscape that I was trying to create or that I was working with in this context. The other thing, I think I take the question of the public input very seriously, and I think that is a critical piece for council to keep in mind: is how extensive will the public input be if we move quickly. We do want it to be thoughtful. I think there's an investment that this should be an effective tool, that the public gets what it feel that they need in terms of transparency, and that it dovetails and integrates well with our other efforts to be transparent. So I did have another thought, but it's gone away. So I am going to offer for a third round, anyone who needs a third round. Okay, everybody. All right, Chris, take it away.
Great. Thank you. This has been really helpful for me, and I'm really glad to hear what the others on the council are kind of thinking on the question. We've talked a lot about the whole accountability and oversight question, but I think Mike raised a good point about, well, what do you ultimately get for your $677,000? And if you look at this, there's really not an enforcement capability in here. You don't really enforce anything. You create reports, you publish the reports, you present the reports, but as has been pointed out, you can ignore the reports. Now, you may ignore the reports at your peril, but if you come up with what you consider to be a powerful reason why you should ignore that report or do it a different way, you theoretically can ignore the report. So for $677,000, you get reports that, if you really wanted to, you could ignore, or you could come up with an alternative way of doing things or whatever. I would want to see some sort of a capability, if you're going to go to the trouble to prepare a report and point out something that needs to be changed, there's some sort of an ability to actually get that change to occur, other than just hoping for the goodwill of either the manager or the council or some other body. When we look at the police auditor function, I think the police auditor is a good model for an audit function that works, and works pretty well. But once again, it's a question of what is the authority of this police auditor to enforce what it is they're doing. And a lot of that enforcement has to come through the collaborative relationship between the auditor and the police chief. And that collaboration, to some degree, is enforced by the desire of the council to ensure that it's enforced, because that auditor is our employee. And as our employee, the auditor walks into that room saying, I'm not just some schmo who got elected to this position. I have the full weight of the City of Eugene City Council behind me when I walk into that room and want to talk about it. So I think there is some value having relationships maybe worked in a little bit different way. You can create so much independence that you lose your ability to be effective. Other than I posted on the website and I presented the report. That's great. I'm looking for more than that. So in summary, if you wanted to ask if counselors were willing to work on a committee, I don't say we have to have it done by February, but if you wanted counselors to work on some sort of a group, a task force, whatever you want to call it, to think about these questions and what an alternative might look like, I'd be happy to participate in that product.
Okay, Betty.
I don't know why we're even talking about it. It's going to be on the ballot. I don't know if people are thinking they want to oppose it. If they do, they can vote against it. This is not the time for a committee. If this fails, that's the time for us to have a council committee and talk about how to get an auditor in another way. But this would be after the election. And I hope that we're not considering, I hear people pointing out all kinds of flaws. I hope we're not considering opposing it as a council. If we could do this as individuals, I suppose if council wants to, they can oppose it, but I think it would be a big mistake. Thank you.
Emily.
Thank you. I agree it would be a big mistake. I really think we should stay neutral. About the high cost of it, it wouldn't all come from the general fund and have to be offset because the auditor would save some money. At least that's what we're hoping. The reason for a large salary is because the requirements for this job are really high, and there's probably not very many people in Eugene who have those. So if you're recruiting in a larger pool, other areas, pay more money. So you might need to do that to compete. The manager came from somewhere else. Not everybody that we have working here came from here. And the voters could decide whether or not they think somebody who doesn't live in Eugene is okay. They don't vote for somebody who's not already a resident. As far as being politically influenced, who their donors are, every single one of us, except for Glenn at this table, is elected, and we all have donors. So I guess the same thing would apply to us. This group is a lot of citizen input, a lot. We don't have the other side, but there'd be a lot of campaigning. And is this conversation leading us to have a vote today on whether we're going to write a measure or not write a measure? And if we are, then do we need another work session to say what it's going to be about, and then have staff write it, and then somehow get some input on that, and then come back and say, is this okay with us? And then once we have that, would we then vote on whether or not to put that on the ballot? In which case, this is a lot of time, and we have other things we should be doing. So why start a committee to talk about it when there's already one on the ballot? It's just so much time. If it fails, let's go for it. But why while it's on the ballot? Let's let people campaign and talk and influence each other and decide. And if this isn't what people want, it won't pass. Every single one of us is free to campaign for or against it. But as a body, I urge us to stay neutral.
Okay. Alan.
So on the residency requirement, it's not that the person needs to be a homegrown product. It's that once they are the auditor, they need to live here. And there is no requirement in the current charter amendment to do that. You have to, I have to, we all have to live in our wards in order to represent as elected officials. And I think that same rule should apply to the auditor. The last point that I was going to make was that I agree with what other councilors have said, that gathering 11,500 signatures is not the same thing as public input. In fact, they couldn't provide public input. They had a yes/no question. Do you want to see this on the ballot? Yes, no. Sign here if you do. I don't know that all those people had time to read the full 5 pages as they were walking to the market of choice when they were signing it. So it was put together by a private group of people and then presented to the citizens. So it wasn't a public process in the sense that I think of a public process where you have a lot of public input and public with minutes and meetings, and anybody can come and add their 2 cents, and then it gets crafted. That's why the mayor put together her work group, was so it would be an open and transparent way of looking at this issue in response to that. It's also interesting to note that in our recent survey on the parks, Eugene said that we're doing a pretty good job. 62 to 22%, 3-to-1 thought the city was headed in the right direction. So I look at that, and I look at what's being proposed. I share Claire's concern that this will be politicized, the issues, rather than trying to make them better. But that's dependent on who becomes the auditor. So the question of getting pulling this together and working on this over the next couple of months. We've been working on this for months. I mean, the auditor committee, the mayor's committee, took 4 months to study this. So we've been thinking about this for quite a long time. So I think it's very possible and very doable to craft a well thought out fix to the problems over the next couple of months. We have until February 12th, so that gives us quite a bit of time, actually, to get a resolution approved, to get it on the May ballot. I'm not sure that's what we'll do, but I think it's our responsibility to take a careful look at this and suggest fixes if we think there should be fixes to this. And I have listed out my things that I have concerns about.
Okay, Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I, too, hope that this council will agree to stay neutral on the question. Let the people judge the question and answer it. But I have to say, whether we eventually comment one way or another as a council, take a position on the initiative that's already on the ballot, or whether we craft something of our own nature for an auditor function, this statement keeps getting said. It just got said, nothing personal, my friend Emily. The auditor will save us money. And that's just patently untrue. The auditor can do nothing to save the city money. The auditor doesn't have the power to change how we spend money. Only the council does. The auditor has to convince the council or the manager to alter what they do in order for money to be saved. And I would suggest to you that the only way the manager will likely change on one of these subjects is with a council vote directing him to. And I know that the manager was not here tonight to allow us the freedom to have a very free conversation about this, but I kind of wish he was here because I'd like to ask him some hypotheticals about that reality. If an auditor suggested a procedural change and the council ordered it done, and there were plenty of good reasons from his perspective not to do it, what that would look like in terms of how we work that out. And from the standpoint of policy, we could start and list for hours ways that we could be saving money on policy questions. What if, for example, the auditor wanted to look into all the agencies that we give human services money to in order to determine if it was being spent appropriately in order to find out if there were savings? Well, that's great, but I would suggest that would create a policy debate that would last for days. I just don't see how an auditor, I don't see yet, I'm willing to be convinced, how an auditor will convince the council to act differently or the manager to act differently, because that's the only thing they can do. Convince.
Okay. Jennifer.
Yeah, I think there are enough problems with this measure that if we could find enough people to get together and look at our options, it would be worth our time. If that group decides there isn't enough time to bring a thoughtful measure to the ballot, then I think that's an okay decision, and we don't have to put something. I don't think there's a requirement to do that just because we get a group together. So I would be in support of doing that.
Claire.
Yeah, I'm not prepared to support the creation of a formal subcommittee to look at another option on the ballot. I'm leaning towards this council remaining neutral in terms of a formal position. I think as individual councilors, we obviously are at liberty to voice our opinions. I do appreciate the comments of Councilor Clark to make us think about what are truly the powers of this office as crafted, and would that be different if we crafted an appointed auditor position? So I think some of those questions would remain irregardless of the particular form. But I think it's an important question. What is the relationship of that position to policy questions that we are the elected body to determine and discuss and take action on?
Okay. So here is my summary of the sense of the group here. and we can do this in a formal way or an informal way. I am not getting a strong sense that the council wants to appoint a committee to actually develop an alternative in the short term, but we can do either a straw poll or a more formal thing, or we can do a head nod. But that's my sense, is that there isn't momentum there, that there is a lot of interest in further study, certainly tracking what's happening with the existing initiative, being part of that discussion. And I will say that my motivation behind creating the study group, my motivation behind having a work session, having this meeting here, is because it is a significant public policy question whether we make this addition to our city government, and it should be a conversation that we have in this setting, in the open, where the public can see it, where it's on television, and they know that we're going through this process. It's part of not only educating ourselves, but also educating the public on this issue, and that I would see the conversation going forward through the spring and beyond about how this role functions to be an important endeavor of the city council, to be paying attention to it and involved in it. We may well come back. I am very interested in Chris suggesting that we could form a smaller committee to look at it, and I think that will be worthwhile, because we'll want to track how this plays out and what the implications are. I think the questions about outcomes are very important to the community. This is a significant investment, and there are challenges. So would you like, I guess I'm going to put it on the table to do not a motion, but just a straw poll about if the council would like to have a subcommittee that would explore at least some of the alternatives to the existing initiative, just to delve into some of those potential. Is there support for that in a straw poll? Yes. Anyone all in favor? Do you want to comment to that first?
Yeah, I'm not necessarily in favor of, at this point, creating a subcommittee. I think a group of 2 or 3 councilors can get together and do that if they want. That doesn't violate any public meeting laws. What I would be interested in is another work session in early January to continue this conversation about this, and then to go from there. And because I think there's a lot of energy around this issue, and there's still a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of concerns that merit more conversation, as opposed to just necessarily a formal committee, which I don't think has a majority vote anyway.
Okay, great. Mike?
It's really painful when I have to say this, but I agree with Alan. I think that there's at least cause and reason for us to be responsive to the public's will, to have another conversation. We've all gotten plenty of emails, and we've seen input in the newspaper on all sides of this question. So another conversation, I think, might be worthwhile. I'm not sure. I hope we remain neutral, but I'm open to, as I said before, being persuaded, and who knows, maybe over our break I might hear something that changes my mind about this. I'm open to being persuaded, but I'm pretty neutral about it right now. But I certainly don't want to take a straw poll of any kind or move to act one way or another on this at the moment.
Okay. Emily?
Thank you. I think it would be irresponsible of us to have yet another work session, the third one. This measure's already on the ballot. If we want to write something, we have to do it lickety-split. We have so many critical issues. We need to spend time on them. We don't get to them. We don't have enough meetings. I'm really against another work session on this topic in the immediate future.
Okay. Any other comments? Betty
opposed.
and then Chris.
I'm definitely opposed to a committee at this time, and I'm opposed to another work session.
Okay. Chris?
Yeah, if we're not really interested in having any sort of a formal process, I'm not interested in formal process. So I can wait. If the rest of the council is not interested in doing something now, I don't think we can have something in time for February. So I wouldn't feel that pressure. So I can wait if the rest of the council wants to take the time to do it. But if you're going to study the issue, you need to study the issue in a public way, not a couple of counselors get together and study the issue. That's too much like what happened, before. So I'm happy to wait and let the chips fall where they may. We don't have to make any decision tonight, because if we don't do anything, that's the neutral position, right? So I agree. We should just do nothing, take the neutral position, and just move forward and see where things go. Whether or not we have another work session, the question I would want to have, I'm perfectly fine with having a work session if we're very clear on exactly what that work session's purpose would be. Is it to point out the problems we see? Because if we're taking a neutral or a non-position, I don't need to have another work session to point out the problems. So I don't know if we need to have another work session unless I'm clear on what we would exactly do at it.
Well, it is clear that there will be a public process for this because there's a ballot on the there's a measure on the ballot in the election. So there will be public discussion. You're free as counselors to have that public discussion and engage at any level that you wish. It can always come back to council. Someone can do a work session poll, bring it back to council, make that request of me. If there's something timely that comes up, it can come back. But for the moment, I think we will leave that as it is, as a constructive discussion. I hope you'll carry that discussion forward in your various wards and help bring people up to speed on the ballot as it goes forward. And thank you all very much. That was a very efficient and clear and helpful and deliberative conversation. So I appreciate that. And now we actually are ready to talk about winter strategies.
Hi all. I'm Mia Carriaga from the City Manager's Office, here with Reagan Watchus, also of the City Manager's Office. And we're here tonight to provide you a brief update on winter strategies as they relate to homelessness. And as you know, the city contributes to our homeless efforts during the winter, primarily not through direct services or operations, but mostly through supporting other organizations through funding allocations, and then of course the ordinances that you have passed in the over the last few years that permit some of the programs that Reagan will talk about in more detail. And then in addition, you provide policy leadership because you have membership both on the Human Services Commission and on the Poverty and Homelessness Board that operates out of the county. So with that, Reagan will talk in some more detail, and we actually this was included in the materials that you received last week. This is a much more comprehensive look at all of our strategies related to homelessness. Tonight, Reagan's going to focus on a little more detail as they relate to, again, winter strategies in the colder months here in Eugene.
Is this the same one we got before?
Yes.
Then we don't need it, do we?
Okay.
So I'll give an overview of some of the programs that are supported by the Lane County Human Services Commission, the community, and the city of Eugene for related to winter strategies. Dusk to Dawn is a program that was approved by the Eugene City Council in December 2015. The program provides approved sites for people to sleep overnight, and it currently operates from November 1st through March 31st. Program capacity has expanded each season since its inception. This year, City Council approved a new site for singles on Highway 99, which allowed for a 30% increase in capacity for that population. City Council approved $155,000 for the Dusk to Dawn program in the FY18 budget. The program is managed by St. Vincent de Paul. The three current Dusk to Dawn sites are a site for singles at a property recently acquired by St. Vincent de Paul on Highway 99. The site consists of 5 heated MASH-style tents for sleeping, a common area, and storage containers. The schedule for its operations is coordinated so that guests can utilize the service station during the day and go straight from there to Dusk to Dawn, and then vice versa in the morning. The wait list is currently 62 people. A site for individuals with vehicles is provided through the Safe Parking Program. Lane County Behavioral Health has allotted 10 parking spaces for people to sleep in their vehicles overnight. This is in addition to the overnight parking program operated by St. Vincent de Paul. Participants in this program are taken from the overnight parking program list, which has 75 people on its wait list. A Dusk to Dawn site for families operates out of the Eugene Missions Hub building. It is providing space for 7 families per night, and the program is operated by First Place Family Center. Last winter, 78 families were served. The Egan Warming Centers began operating in Eugene and Springfield in 2008. The program offers overnight shelter for singles and couples without children on nights when the temperature drops to 30 degrees or below. The centers rely heavily on a cadre of volunteers and donated spaces, mostly at churches, plus the LCC main campus. During the 2016 and 17 winter season, the Egan Warming Centers activated 25 nights, serving 1,616 unique guests and provided over 25,000 meals and snacks. Tonight will be the 8th night in a row that Egan has activated its first activation this season. Funding from the Human Services Commission also supports motel vouchers for families with children for use on the nights that Egan Warming Centers activate. This program is administered by Catholic Community Services. Eugene's overnight parking program, rest stop program, and Opportunity Village continue to provide emergency year-round shelter options for people who are unhoused. Combined capacity for these programs is over 225 nightly. Lane County's launch of an overnight parking pilot program in the unincorporated area of Santa Clara will also add some additional overnight capacity. Permits for 10 parking spots will be available year-round. City staff are also working on creating 2 new car camping spots for families at Amazon and Hilliard Community Centers, which will open soon. St. Vincent de Paul's First Place Family Center manages the Interfaith Night Shelter Program, which provides overnight shelter for homeless families during the school year through a network of over 30 faith communities that offer shelter, food, and recreational activities. All of these programs provide emergency winter shelter and services to people who are experiencing homelessness. There are other important community programs that provide critical help during the winter months to those who are housed but very low income. Lane County administers several energy assistance programs and weatherization services. The City of Eugene also assists low-income homeowners through the Emergency Home Repair Program, which provides assistance for critical home repairs, including heating and electrical system repairs and roof repairs. Oregon state lawmakers approved increased funding for homeless programs in local communities during the last legislative session, which will provide additional resources for the Egan Warming Centers, the Motel Vouchers for Families program, the Overnight Parking Program, and Dusk to Dawn. All the programs described are providing crucial shelter and services to people in need. They rely not solely on government funding, but also on private donations and a substantial amount of community in-kind support through volunteer hours and donations. The programs are all operated through critical partnerships that involve St. Vincent de Paul, Lane County Human Services Division, Food for Lane County, the Eugene Mission, the City of Eugene, the State of Oregon, many other participating service providers and nonprofit agencies, and volunteers in the community.
So just as a very high-level recap, the increase in capacity that we have created this winter is through the site out on Highway 99 for Dusk to Dawn that you approved several weeks ago, which, as Reagan stated earlier, is operating with a 30% increase. The 2 new car camping locations at our community centers, and then the increase in funding for motel vouchers from the Human Services Commission.
Thank you. I just have a quick question. How many families are served with those motel vouchers, or what's the capacity of that?
That's a good question. I'd have to get back with you on how many were served last year and then how many are expected to be served with the increased funding through the state this year. I'm not sure about that.
Okay. All right. That'd be interesting to know. Anybody else in the queue? Emily?
Do we know yet how many people are using Egan each night? This is day 8. Probably Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights are going to be below 30. That makes 11 days of volunteers, a lot of volunteers. What if it gets cold again for 3 weeks? Egan can't stay open every night. So my reason for the poll was, what are our emergency options? Mm-hmm. And then the other thing, you said 30% more for Dusk to Dawn. How many people is that?
80 at the site for singles.
80 more people?
No, they did 60 last year, so 80 this year at the Highway 99 site.
So that's 20 more people.
20 more people. Mm-hmm.
It sounds different than 30%. So, and then how many people have we sheltered this year out of our 3,000 to 4,000 people?
We usually don't have that data mid-year. We did reach out to Egan to try and get a sense of numbers, and we haven't been able to get in contact with them. I think they're busy setting up for the cold nights. So, and I meant to say earlier, we will be back with a full work session related to your poll. This was an update only. We will come back with a work session, and then in addition, we will be back to talk about Human Services Commission generally, including funding, which also relates to this topic.
Do we have any idea when that work session will be? Because it needs to be before spring break.
We'll work with the mayor.
Thank you.
Yep. We knew we were going to have trouble scheduling a work session before Christmas, and I wanted it before at least an update for you. So that was the reason for this update. Was it wasn't time for a full. No, it's we're chipping our way through all the issues. Okay, we've got Claire next.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I appreciate the update and knowing what is out there and what we are doing, and 20 additional people are able to get shelter because we were able to expand that capacity on Highway 99. So it's small relative to the need, but it's an increase from what we were able to do in the past. And I just wanted to note, I do believe that the Board of County Commissioners has agreed to their own version of our car camping program for unincorporated Lane County that's within the urban growth boundary. So that's mostly in my ward and maybe a little bit of Councillor Clark's ward, it's mostly in the Santa Clara area. I believe they are restricting it to places of worship and commercial and industrial businesses. I don't believe that private residents are allowed to host car campers, but that is, again, a small expansion in the capacity, but an expansion nonetheless. And I do believe there was at least one church that was very eager to get started with hosting some car campers under that new program from the county.
Alan.
Yeah, thanks for this report. It actually is quite impressive that this isn't a one-pager on both sides. It's actually multiple pages long with detail about all the things that we're doing, and it's actually 12 pages long. It is kind of impressive what we've done. I've always thought of homelessness, working on this for 20 plus years, that there's no silver bullet here, that there's silver buckshot. And this is proof of that theory. What we're trying to do is do a lot of little things because there is no one thing we're going to do that's going to solve this problem. So it's, but what we need to do is focus on the things that we know that work in this, and then put them on steroids and do them a lot more, like rest stops and getting rest stops throughout the city and equally dispersing them and doing more Opportunity Village and Emerald Villages and things like that are the things that are going to work. And so doing more of what we already know works is how we're going to chip away at this. If this were easily solvable, we would have already done it. And as Mike Gleason used to say, this is a world-class hard problem that nobody solved. But I think Eugene's doing more than almost anybody in the country in totality. The amount of money we spend, the amount of people that we serve, 20 doesn't seem like a whole lot when there's 2,000 people out there that are homeless, but it's 20 more people that aren't homeless, or at least have shelter.
Emily's asked for a second round. Anyone else want a first round? Okay, Emily, got it.
I wasn't asking about homelessness. That's a huge, huge issue. I'm asking about emergency shelter when the weather will kill you. That's what I want to know our plans are. Rest stops, little villages, apartments, motel vouchers. Awesome. Steroids, please, let's do that. This isn't about curing homelessness. It's about keeping people from sleeping in the ice and snow. And that's what I'm concerned about. Would we open schools? What would we do? Last year, people who were housed got to go to a school opened by the Red Cross and take showers and sleep inside where it's warm. But if you didn't have an address, you couldn't go there. So what are we going to do if it's 3 weeks, and who knows, of ice and snow and wind? How many people are we going to let die before we open up buildings we have, community centers, schools, churches. How many people are going to die before we give them emergency shelter?
So I think just to follow up on that, first of all, thank you for this. I understand that the Egan Warming Center is using about 300 volunteers a night. And so, they can keep going if they have the volunteers. And really, right now, that's our fastest, quickest, cheapest way to serving more people is getting more volunteers to sign up for Egan. I know they have another training on Tuesday next week. And so I think we could get the word out about the need for training more volunteers and making that more robust because they'll be pretty worn out after this particular run of cold weather.
We'd be happy to help spread the word about the training on Tuesday. You might recall that last year we used our CERT email group, which reaches a huge number of people throughout Eugene, to let them know about Egan last year. We can certainly do that again.
Right, and I think that would be great because we could be most responsive that way than trying to create a new system. So, okay, any other questions, comments? I think we actually finished early. It's amazing. Thank you very much, and we'll see you at 7:30.